Good morning, everyone. I'm Michael Romine, and this is the Houston Grass Podcast. Uh, we are towards the last couple of days of February right now. Last week, we got about a 4 or 5 day dose of some really cold air again. So that was the second time this year I've had to cover up my palm trees. I would say everything is amply brown outside for sure. I have noticed a few little buds on the trees and whatnot. Before this last real cold air, the grass, especially the Bermuda grass, it always greens up first. It was really starting to show signs of life, but now it's certainly been pushed back into dormancy again, and it it will probably stay that way this week. We've got highs in the 70s, but once we get back into consistently in those 70s and low 80s, that's when we really see everything start to bounce back. Greenness is all about soil temperature, and once we've had ample rain here along the Gulf Coast. I know a lot of the people in Central Texas can't say that, but we've had ample rain, and all we need now, the only ingredient is just a little bit warmer temperatures, and everything, including the grass, will start greening up. Like I said, Bermuda grass is always the first thing to green up. My brother down at the farm sent me a video of them mowing off the Palmetto St. Augustine. And the Palmetto St. Augustine, for whatever reason, it is of the St. Augustines, it greens up the fastest. You can even see the pallet sitting out here on our lot. You can see how much greener the Palmetto is. So they were going ahead. We talk about scalping, and we're going to touch on that here in a little bit. They were going ahead and scalping off with the real mower, those golf course style mowers, the Palmetto, just to get that sun to penetrate through down, shear that dead stuff off, and get that sunlight to penetrate down through to that new growth and get it kicked off here. They're not doing that with any of the rest of the grasses. I will say that. As green grass goes, before I get into that, this time of year it is inevitable. The first question that we get from 50 to 60% of callers is your grass green? And by no means is it green. Like I said, the palmetto is starting to show a little bit of green to it. I'm not going to make guesses as to percentages of greenness, but it's slim on all the grasses except the palmetto. It won't take long, a couple of weeks, and we'll probably get to 50-50, as barring any more frosts, which is not unheard of for February, early March. We could get a frost. So we'll also touch on that here when we're going to talk about fertilizers. So if you're needing green grass, palmetto is the greenest thing I've got right now. It's probably better than 50-50 as far as greenness. It's certainly not 100%. Everything else is way less than 50% green. The grass is dormant. It's not dead. It will be back with a vengeance here for long, but we're not there yet. So let's get into this a little bit here. Now is the time to inspect your yard, so look for signs of winter damage, shade stress, things that aren't coming back. We're about to come into the next 3 months, the best time of year to do anything with your yard, whether we're replacing grass or trying to reinvigorate areas or whatever. We're going to have moderate temperatures that are very conducive to growing everything, and grass included here. So now is the time to find those weak spots, see what we can do to remedy those. We need to be looking for brown patches. I know it's primarily a fall issue, but it does come about. It has all to do with those two transition times of year. With the temperature, with the cool nights and warmer days, that's what brown patch needs to come about, and we are going into another one of those seasons right now. So if you've got some brown patch, you need to be thinking about, depending on the severity of it, maybe putting out some Heritage G on the whole yard to prevent it. That is one option. It's an expensive option because the stuff is expensive, but if you don't want to look at it at all, you could do that. You could spot treat it wherever you know the spots are going to come up or they're already there. You could treat that. Consider that. And we'll talk about that more in a minute as well. Another thing you'll want to observe is how much thatch is there. We're going to talk about scalping the yard off in a minute, so you'll want to see, do I have a real thick layer of debris and stuff? Are there leaves and stuff that need to be removed? Is there a thick mat of grass? If you've got zoysia in particular, because it's such a dense turf, it has a tendency to have the most thatch, so you'll need to start making a plan. Right now, I wouldn't scalp off any grass It's just too early. If we get another frost and you expose all that new growth, that could be tough on it. By this time next month, we will absolutely be talking about that, and maybe in the next 2 or 3 weeks, 4 weeks might be, you might be getting 80% green by then. You kind of want to walk that line of right when you start to see that new growth is when you talk about scalping things off. However, right now what you could do is kind of lightly rake, not with the rake with the big stiff metal tines, but the old leaf rakes that have a lot of the long fingers and have a lot of give. You could pull that across there and get as much of that dead stuff out of there. You don't have to get aggressive with it, but get as much of that loose dead grass out of there as you can, so things can start breathing a little bit there. You just don't want to beat up any new growth that's trying to poke its head out there. So the grass is certainly still mostly dormant, and you want to avoid anything that could hurt it. Right now, everybody is wanting to get the brown and ugly out of their yard, whether it's the bushes that need to be trimmed and greening the grass up. It's just not time just yet. I will say that this week or next, I'm probably going to get all the bushes that died back in the two freezes back to the ground and start getting the dead stuff out of there. I am going to wait a couple more weeks to do that to my grass, though, to scalp it off. So hold off on the aggressive getting rid of all the dead stuff just yet. I would anyway. We're going to talk a little bit now about spring fertilization and stuff. We're going to mainly talk about fertilizer and which of the three fertilizers from nitrophos that we should be talking about using right now. Also pre-emergent. If you haven't put out the barricade pre-emergent, it'll be time to put that down as well. But I want to briefly mention, like I did a minute ago, the fungicide, the Heritage G. If you do see brown patch coming up, there's areas, okay, this time of year I get the ugly brown circles in my yard about this time. Put it out as a preventative. You only have to put half the amount of material. I think it's a pound per 1,000 square feet instead of 2 pounds per 1,000 square feet if you already have it. So to put it out there preventatively costs less because you use half the amount of materials. Do keep an eye on that to keep the brown circles out of the yard. I do think that we are right on the cusp of, we are starting to sell a lot of fertilizer, but I'm telling people to hold off a little bit longer. I would be willing to bet that we are done with the 20-degree temperatures for the year, but a late season frost is certainly not beyond happening here. So I would maybe give it another week or two before I put out fertilizer. We follow the Randy Lemon schedule that's closely associated with the nitrophos schedule here. You can Google either of those, and if you look into it, you will see that now is the time to be at least purchasing your fertilizer and getting ready to put that out. And what is available, at least from us, and I'm not sure if they've got others, but the primary three is, it's all the same fertilizer. There is an orange or almost red bag that's called Imperial, and they are all 15-5-10. The mix of fertilizer is 15-5-10, and the Imperial is the one without any weed killer, so there is no weed and feed component to it. We are just feeding in that case. So if you don't have weeds or don't have a lot of weeds, that is the way I would go. You don't want to be using herbicides unnecessarily. If you don't have a lot of weeds, just get the Imperial, fertilize, just feed the lawn and get it out there. After you mow, we better go into each one because there is one weed and feed that you don't want a freshly mowed yard. But with the Imperial, ideally it's a freshly mowed yard. You put the fertilizer out at the recommended rate, which is on the back of the bag, tells you how to put it out there with your rotary spreader that kind of slings it around out there. You don't want to overdo it, which is certainly possible to do. Put it out there and then water it in thoroughly. I think the bag suggests a 1/2 inch, so pretty much a normal cycle of your irrigation. We are still getting real regular rains. If you could put it out right before a rain, that would be ideal, because I don't love the idea of turning on the irrigation right now. My irrigation is off and is going to remain off unless I just need it to fertilize or something like that, because you don't want to overwater. That brings about the brown patch and stuff like that. So just get that fertilizer out there and water it in. Now another option is the same fertilizer, and it's in a purple bag, bright purple bag, and it is a weed and feed. Same 15-5-10. The active ingredient to kill the weeds is atrazine. When you get into using these fertilizers with herbicides in them, the weed killers, you want to be careful with it. If you get them in your flower beds or anything like that, it can be tough on shrubs, and especially if you've got color out in the yard. If you've got snapdragons or something like that, it may kill them dead if you've got that on them. So both of these weed and feeds that we're going to talk about, the atrazine and the Trimec, so you want to be careful with them. The one with the atrazine is another one. As soon as you put it out, freshly mowed yard, put it out, and then you want to water it in really well. Now, the one that takes a little bit more doing is, I would call it a turquoise bag. It's the weed and feed, same 15-5-10 fertilizer, but the active ingredient to kill weeds is called Trimec. And the application is a little bit different. Most of these weed killers kill the broadleaf weeds, the clovers, and the things with the big lettuce-looking leaves and stuff like that. The grassy weeds, a lot of these don't have as much success getting rid of those. So you would put this fertilizer out, and you want ideally there to be a fresh dew on the grass. I found that to be best. If you don't have a fresh dew or you can't time that right, just run your irrigation or put a sprinkler out there for 5 minutes and wet down the leaves of the grass and get it damp, and then you put the fertilizer out at the recommended rate. The granules have to stick to those big leaves for a couple of days, and it takes it up through the chemical up through the leaves. So you do not want to water this one in immediately after. You want to wait a couple of days, let it absorb that chemical, and within a couple of days you'll see the effects. It starts curling those weeds up, and there's no doubt about which ones it's going to kill and which ones it's not. So that one takes a little bit more planning, but it is a great one as well. Something that I should mention for sure here is that the Trimec is safe for all the grasses. The atrazine, you do not want to use that on the Bermudas and the zoysias. So the purple bag is a no-go for the Bermudas and the zoysia. It will take its toll on those. I don't think that it would kill them at these rates, but it would be really bad for them. So if you've got Bermuda or zoysia, you want to do Trimec only. Also, Randy Lemon jumped up on and down on this for years, is that atrazine is a tough chemical. You do not want to use it year after year underneath your trees and stuff like that, because those trees can eventually take that chemical up as well. It would not be good for your trees. Again, if you can avoid using herbicides, you keep your grass thick and you follow the pre-emergent programs and stuff like that and keep the weeds out of there, you shouldn't have to use a weed and feed. But if you do, use them sparingly and just be careful when you're putting them out there. You do want to have a note here that says it's kind of a guess as to when you put out this fertilizer. When you start to see the grass kind of green up naturally, you know the plant is growing, and when it is growing is the only time it's going to take that fertilizer up into the plant. So you want to see some green, you want to see some growing, and you want to be fairly confident that we're past the last frost. So there's really no science to it, but around here it is usually early to mid-March that you start to be safe to do that. So let's see here. We've talked a little bit about the fertilizers. Do always follow the labels. Everybody asks us, well, how much of it should I put out and whatnot? All the bags list the different spreaders on the back of them. Or if not, I'm sure you can Google. I know there's so many different spreaders. The safest bet is to have any of the Scott's, the little green plastic spreaders. Those are the most popular, so that's on the back of most every bag. So just pay attention to that, and more is not better. Just because you have some of the bags left over, don't just go at it again just because you have some of the material. All of these things will save. If you roll the bags down tight and put them in your garage in some place they're not going to get wet, it will last. So don't feel like you have to use it all. That is something else that I would say. And again, we talked a little about fertilizer. Now is the time to get your barricade pre-emergent down. We talk about it all the time. You do that 3 or 4 times a year. That basically creates that layer, that invisible layer over the soil that keeps the weed seeds from falling on those bare dirt areas and germinating and turning into a problem. Like I said, you're pre-emergent, you're putting it out as a preventative as opposed to post-emergent like the atrazine and Trimec that we talked about. It kills the weeds that have already come up. So that is the difference in those two. Scalping the yard is another thing that we always talk about. Scalping the yard is basically when you set your mower to 1.5 inches or 2 inches once a year, this time of year. Like I said, when you start looking at it being safe for that fertilizer, it's safe to go ahead and scalp it off. You start to see a fair amount of new growth coming through. But you basically go in, you do it, like I said, this one time a year. You drop that mower deck down and go over the yard, and then you rake all of that dead material out of there. And obviously, the point of this is to get all of that dead material out of the way so that sun and water and fertilizer can penetrate down to the new regenerating plant that's there and bring it back to life. You do definitely want to rake up all of that dead material. I know we talked back and forth about whether or not to bag clippings or to mulch them. This is a definite bag them. If you don't have a bagging mower or your lawn service doesn't, then they need to be raked and they need to be gotten out of there because it does no good. It's not going to add any nitrogen to the soil or anything like that. You want to get that dead stuff out of there. It will promote the new growth. It will allow you visually to see more green down in there, so the yard will look better. It allows the water, sun, and everything to get down there where it needs to be. So you don't want to do that too early and expose all that new leaf tissue to that last frost that on that tender growth. That would be really tough, and it would set it back and be stressful to it. So like I said, you just don't want to cause any undue stress. Let's see, like I said, 1 to 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches is where I would set my mower if I was doing the scalping. Make sure you're not doing it to a totally brown yard, or that could be detrimental. Let it start greening up for sure. We've talked a little bit about the fertilizer and the weed and feeds. Now is the time to go ahead and get all of those things and be ready, kind of watching the yard. We are not early spring yet, but we're close, and for the Gulf Coast, we're probably real close here. I'm sure we'll be in the 80s in a blink. Just to get that stuff ready, the first time you see that start to happen, you can get that fertilizer out there and get it watered in and be on your way. The next time we'll be talking about fertilizer. We'll talk about it again because you've basically got about the next 6 weeks to get this one out there, and then we'll be talking about the super turf, which is the little bit higher nitrogen fertilizer that we'll be talking about like in probably May, June time frame. So get your weed and feed out there or your imperial out there right now, and then we'll talk more next month as well about the core aeration that we're getting into. Also the time, real good time of year to do the core aeration where it goes in and pokes a hole in the ground and then pulls the plug of dirt out and distributes them out across the yard. That is the best way to do that. I would think that's more of a mid to late March thing as well. You want that grass to be good and growing when you're doing that as well. Spot treating any weeds. If you don't have to use the weed and feeds, don't. If there's just little areas here and there of weeds, we don't get into consulting about different herbicides other than the weed and feed that we sell because they can be so dangerous. They're best usually left up to commercial applicators to put out. There are a lot of them out there, and there are some people in Houston that have a lot more knowledge than we do, places that sell those kind of things that could advise you on using herbicides, but we don't do that. If it's such a small area of weeds that you can pull them after a good rain or after you water the lawn heavily, if you can pull those weeds because there's just a few here and there, that is certainly a better option than putting out herbicide over the whole yard to get those few. So that is kind of all the care things that I have. It is the first weekend of March. This will start our Saturday hours. We will be here Monday through Friday 8 to 5, and we will be here Saturdays 8 to 12. Call us. We're available. Pick our brains. If you do foresee a grass project coming up, especially one that you're going to want some help with, like you're going to need installation help and dirt work and stuff like that, call us sooner rather than later. The gentleman that does all of our install work's name is Omar, and he gets very busy to the tune of 2, 3, 4 weeks out on his work by the time late March rolls around probably. So if something was coming up, there is absolutely nothing wrong with going ahead and getting grass work done right now. We are a little bit early. The grass is not green yet. There's no worry of price increases or anything like that, but if you're doing the job yourself, we will be here and we will have grass. There are times that the farm starts limiting the amounts of different grasses that we can get. Sometimes they run out of the Bermudas and stuff like that. We don't run out of St. Augustine. We've got a lot more acres of that, but the Bermudas and the zoysias and stuff like that, I would definitely get on those lists sooner rather than later as well if you're considering those things. Another thing I would like to mention is that a lot of people call us about Palmetto St. Augustine, and Palmetto St. Augustine we only sell by the pallet most of the year, like other than spring. But in the springtime we try to keep some of it here to sell by the piece and the half pallets and stuff like that, just because we can the whole thing with selling grass is it is a perishable product. We can only keep it here so long before it goes bad. This time of year there are enough people looking for the palmetto pieces, and palmetto, by the way, that's our shade tolerant St. Augustine, the more shade tolerant St. Augustine than the regular Raleigh St. Augustine. If you're looking for that, we do have that by the piece this time of year. We'll start trying to get it like on just Fridays, but if there's enough demand for it, we will get it more days. So it's best to call about it. It is a little bit more expensive than the Raleigh St. Augustine pieces, but if you've got spots that are going in shadier areas, palmetto is definitely the way you want to go. The other grass that I want to mention is the cobalt St. Augustine we started selling last year. Its shade tolerance and disease tolerance is what it brings to the table. I don't know how many acres they started with, 5-7 acres or something like that, and they're going to use right now, at least for spring, they're going to use the crop that has already grown back to expand those acres. We had a lot of great success with it. I could see it eventually being right there with palmetto, or maybe even replacing palmetto St. Augustine. It greened up fast. It did really well in the shade to everyone we sold it to last year. It's really good stuff. We're just trying to expand the acreage so that we can have more of it for later in this year, next year, this time. And for now, palmetto is kind of what we've got as a solution to shadier areas. Cobalt will be one of the things that we will talk a lot more about in the future, but the inventory is just not there yet. It's just so new. So give us a call and you can pick our brains about those. So I think that is kind of all I have here. Next month we'll talk about taking those covers off the backflow devices and getting ready to start watering again, probably, at least being ready if we continue to get the regular rain. We'll also talk a little bit about mowing and more about that core aeration that I mentioned a little earlier as well. Thank you for listening and have a good start to spring. Enjoy the weather, hopefully. Thank you.